This case here might look very familiar to you. Can you guess what it is yet? Did you guess right? No, it is not the Fractal Design Torrent. This is actually the HCS195V2. Most definitely not a torrent, but it's way cheaper. I mean, like,
way cheaper.
So let's dive in and see if this case is right for you. So as you can see from the front, it's very much based on the Fractal Torrent, as we said at the start of the video. And unfortunately, that's pretty much where the similarities end between this and the Fractal Torrent. One, the Fractal Torrent is a much more expensive case and a much more kind of high caliber case, as you will. This one is a more budget orientated case with the look of something that's quite popular, being the Fractal Torrent. But as I said, that's really where the similarities end with this case. So we're going to do our usual thing. We're going to go round the case and then work our way in. We've actually already built into this case. So very similar to the Fractal Torrent again. I know I said the front is where the similarities end, but the buttons are in a very similar position. That's maybe the only other thing that's similar to the Fractal Torrent. But on this one, there is no USB-C. It doesn't have that option. I did reach out to the people that make this case, and it's something they will consider depending on how much it bumps the price up. I think it's worth having USB-C on a case like this personally, but I don't make the case, so it's up to the people that design and make and manufacture the case to decide whether that's worth putting in or not. So we've got on the left here the power button, and then we've got, I think that's a reset button, USB 2, headphone, microphone and headphone jack there, USB 2 again, and a USB 3.0 it says, at least that's what it says on there as well. I suspect that's all it is. And then we've got an LED button for the ARGB fans on the front, and we'll get to that when we look inside the actual case as well. They are ARGB, but there's a bit of an issue with it, and we'll go through that at the end of the video, because it's a bit of an oversight, I think, unless I've missed something. As I said, we'll go through that at the end of the video. And we also have a dust filter on the top, should you wish to suck air in from the top. I think most builders tend to blow air out of the case or push air out from the top of the case. That seems to be the most natural way to have air flowing out, especially hot air, as it would be. So actually in this one I've got a radiator in there, and you'll see that in a moment. But if you're blowing air out, you don't need that. If you're sucking air in, then you do need the dust filter on there. And it's a pretty standard dust filter. It's one I've seen on many cases before. Tiny little hexagon, I think they are. Tiny little ones anyway. So that will do a good job at stopping dust getting in, which is perfect if that's what you want it to do. But in the configuration that I've got this built in, the dust filter will be off. But it is magnetized, so you can just stick it on the side of the case or on the back of the case if it's out of view, if you don't want it or don't need it. We're going to leave it on the case for now, because that is where it's designed to go. So that's pretty much the top of the case. On the front, obviously, we've got the Torrent Lookalike kind of front panel, and this comes off very, very easily, actually. I say very easily. So there we go. That came off fairly easily. It is new, so that's probably why that was a bit harder to get off. But it's just pull it off, basically, and then you've got access to the free 120 ARGB fans that you see on the front there. Now this, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but there is definitely a dust filter there. Very similar to what was on the top that I just showed you. So obviously that would be sucking air in and then capturing the dust on this side. And you could obviously hoover that out if that's what you needed to do. Unfortunately on this side, hopefully you can see this, these have been kind of melted plastic, sort of nubbins or whatever you want to call them. So you can't actually very easily pull this off. And that would be the only issue I've really got with the front of the case, is that you can't take that off to properly give it a clean out. You'd have to get a hoover in there or a brush or something to brush it out, but it's not a major issue because most people would be sucking air, cooler air into the front of the case. I guess there are ways to get it off if you really want it off. And then we can just pop that back on the front like that. So onto the left side of the case where the tempered glass side panel is, and it's not, I don't think it's a very thick tempered glass side panel. It is held in by 4 screws. They are not captive screws, so be careful you don't drop them, as I just nearly did, taking the screws out. So these screws here will actually screw straight into, well, through the glass. There's little 4 holes in the glass in each corner basically, and they just screw in like that. There's no kind of what's the word, velvet type of finish on the top of the screws there to make it soft. They literally just touch up against the tempered glass on the side there. Now it looks like it is actually standard 4mm thick. I thought it was thinner than that, but it's actually about 4mm thick, so that is actually quite nice to see. But obviously be careful with this thing, because there are no protective edges or anything like that. It is basically a piece of glass, so you do have to be a bit careful with that. And putting it back in is actually not too bad. You just kind of slot it into the bottom. There's like a little wedge on the bottom that you can just kind of rest that on, push it up, and then you screw your screws back in. Not the most easy application for the side panel, but this is kind of old school. I would call it old school, but a lot will just kind of slide on, and then you have the 2 screws on the back to just kind of hold it in place. But it is a very, very cheap case, so you do have to compromise on some things. Okay, so as I said earlier, we've already got a system in here. We built a quick system up just for some photos for their website. We'll get into that a bit later. But we've got the motherboard in there. Obviously you can see the motherboard back, the IO shield there in the back, graphics card and power supply, and space for a 120mm exhaust fan on the back. The case doesn't come with, or at least our one doesn't come with, a 120mm exhaust fan, but they do have a thing on their website where you purchase this. If you purchase it through their website, you can actually then get a free fan to go on the back. And I think it's the same ARGB fans as the front of this case. You can actually get one for free to put on the back. I mean, it would be nice if it came with it already, but it is a cheap case and you do get free on the front already. It's not too much of a big deal to go on there, send you proof of purchase, all that kind of thing, which is what you will need to get the free item. There are a couple of other free items on there as well that you can pick, but if you are wanting a fan for exhaust, which is a good idea to be honest, then you can do that. Pretty standard on the back here. This is a little bit old school, is that these slots are kind of not welded, but kind of stuck in. They're not, basically once you take them out, you can't put them back in. They bend off like really, really old style cases from maybe quite a long time ago when I first started getting into PC building. Actually, they just kind of bend off and that's it. You can't put one back on. That is kind of a shame, because like I said, like I've just done there, you bend that too far, it will fall off, and then you won't be able to put one on. You'd have to get some on Amazon or somewhere else, or maybe reach out to the company, see if they can send you some replacement. I don't know that's an option or not, but it's a shame to see that they haven't given you spare ones, or at least ones that you can put back on, because builds change over time, and just would be a nice touch to see that as an option. And also not have these metal bars here that you can see. So for those of you that do actually want to vertical mount your GPU, most of them will require nothing in this space here where the PCI slots go for that kind of bracket to fit in there, because obviously this case is quite narrow and it doesn't allow you to vertical mount a GPU. So that's something you need to consider as well. But you know, if you're not going to vertical mount, then no issue really at all. Obviously you can see the power supply in there. It fits in there quite nicely. It is a bit tight being a narrow case, but we'll get into that when we look at the back of the case, and I'll explain why that is, why it's quite tight in there for a standard size ATX power supply. That's pretty much it on the back. So we're going to look at the side you'll really kind of need to know about is the cable management side. I just want to mention that being a cheap case, the metals used in this thing are not amazingly strong, but they're good enough, to be honest with you, for a build. If you're on a budget, on a low end budget, it's fine. But just to show you the flex, I don't know if you can see that. Quite flexible, but again, it is a cheap case. It is very cheap for what you get. Okay, so if I can turn the case around and hopefully show it at the right angle. If not, I'll try and do some B-roll over me talking about this kind of stuff. There isn't a lot of room here on the backside for cable management, at least on this part of it here. I honestly, other than the tray, which I will show you now, So this is a tray that will kind of fit at the bottom front of the case, which a lot of cases do that kind of thing, to be fair. And you can move it. It has 2 positions where you can move it, and I'll show you that in a second. Its default position is really, really close to the power supply here, being that this is a full ATX power supply. It takes up almost just under about half the width of this entire case, maybe just under, but it doesn't leave a lot of room for cables coming out of the power supply itself. It's very, very tight, in fact. So there is a slot for you to move over. I'll show you that in a second. If we tip it up a minute, there are 2 positions. Yeah, so it doesn't move far, but it does move over a little bit. So this is where it would mount here on these 4 here. You just have to move it over one just to give a little bit of extra clearance, maybe, I don't know, 5 centimeters more space in the bottom for cable management or cables coming off of the power supply. It's not a lot, but it should be enough for most power supplies to be able to get cables out and into the motherboard and your hard drives and whatever else you've got plugged into this case. So this bracket doesn't look much, but you can actually mount 2 3.5-inch hard drives, one on the bottom and one on the top, or any combination of hard drive and SSDs. So it kind of line up like that, basically. Screw it in on the top so it would sit just like that, and then you have another one underneath, or that one underneath, if we just slide that in there, and then you'd have an SSD or whatever storage medium you're going to choose. Well, it'll have to be SSD or hard drive, won't it? You can't mount anything else to it unless you're going to drill holes into it. Now, looking at the diagram on their website, it shows that you can actually mount another 2 SSDs here and here. Now, at first look, before I started making this video, I had a look at this and thought, where on earth are you supposed to mount the drives? Because there's these little hook things here that are kind of going to prevent it. But I guess they would have to go on the other side. I can't really see any other place for them to go. There are actually 4 screws there, and you've got holes here for the screws. So I'm guessing the hard drives would mount on the other side. We'll have a look at that in a minute, and then the screws will just go through here. I don't know entirely if that's correct or not. I'll have to double check with that, but I've got a feeling that that is pretty much the only way you could do it. And then obviously the power and the data cable would come out these holes here and down here, depending on which way around you mount your drives, but I suspect that's probably where they would go. So all in all, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4 drives plus whatever you can fit on your motherboard if it's got M.2 slots anyway. So you've got a good amount of capacity for drives, for storage. The other thing that might be worth a note is that on the back panel, well, obviously you can see there's a big hole here. That makes it really easy if you're mounting a different back plate there for maybe AMD or Intel and you need to change it, or whatever you want to do. If you're changing your cooler, you just take the side panel off, take the glass panel off the other side, hold it, put a new one on, screw it on, and you can do that from, you know, you can kind of just do it from either side. You don't need to strip down the system, which is really, really good, actually. That's really good. More and more are doing big open spaces there for different types of brackets that you can mount for the CPU itself. So it's good to see that on a cheaper budget orientated case. As you can see, cable management wasn't a priority when I built this system recently, so we've just done a quick cable management job, not a very good one to be honest with you, and we've kind of routed it down this way. Again, we've got these kind of cutouts here the way you can just about get through a Velcro cable tie, which is basically what I was using to do this, or you can use, if you use them, the plastic ones, but they're a bit of a waste, especially if you're constantly changing the system. You have to cut it, get a new one. It's a bit of a waste. You might as well use a Velcro tie where you can kind of reuse it. You know, it's a bit better for the planet after all, instead of wasting plastic. But you can just about get them through there, and that's fine. Again, where the hard drives are, where the SSDs can go here, there's 4 there for those as well. And there's actually quite a lot all over the tray here. You've got multiple places where you could route cables. If your cables are long enough, I mean, I could have moved that for the CPU power, ATX 12-volt power there, and routed it down that way maybe. That might have been a bit of a tidier route. Yeah, you've got multiple places where you can do that if that's the kind of thing you're looking for. So it's not a bad case. It's not bad for cable management is basically what I'm trying to say. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got a system built into it already. It doesn't post, the graphics card is dead. If you've seen one of our previous videos, you will already know that this is a dead GPU. It's a 1070. I just put it in there for the build to fire it up. But as you can see, it takes up to 80x and it fits in there quite nicely. There's plenty of room to get power cables, data cables into the sockets down there for the SATA, and plenty of room for plugging in the front I/O as well. So that's really good to see as well. Remembering that this is a budget case, there are no rubber grommets at all where the power and data cables will come through from the other side of the case that we just looked at. It's not really a necessity, to be honest with you, in a budget case. It's a nice to have, but it's not really needed. It doesn't change the fact that the system will work or it won't work. It just covers the holes. So not really something I think a budget conscious user would really need to worry about in this instance. One thing they have thought about is that there is actually a lot of ventilation. There's a lot of holes in the back, as you saw earlier, and where the power supply shroud is here. Obviously got a hole there as well, and that can show off if you've got RGB on your power supply, should you have one of those. Unfortunately, we'll get into the unfortunately's in a minute, but as you can see there, it's upside down, or at least the sticker's upside down. Now you could probably heat gun that maybe and put the sticker around the other way just to make it the right way around, but I didn't on this build. While we're on the subject of the PSU, the measurements for the maximum size of the PSU is 340 by 150 by 86 millimeters according to their website. So that's something to bear in mind when you're picking your power supply. You go stupid large on your power supply, you're going to have a problem if you're using drives in the tray at the bottom that I showed you earlier. Just get a standard size power supply. You don't really need one of those stupid long 1200 watt, literally will be half the width of this case, power supplies, because that's just kind of overkill really, depending on what you've got in there obviously, but you should be looking at a different type of case if you're spending that kind of money on a power supply. If you're not going water cooling, then you need to be aware of the maximum height between the CPU and the glass panel, which is 160 millimeters. The maximum length GPU that you can put in here is 340 millimeters, which will take it somewhere around here, I think. You can fit a 360 millimeter rad in here on the front, and there is a space down the bottom, and hopefully you can see this, there is a space down the bottom there to mount the radiator and some fans as well. So you've got that space there if you want to mount the radiator and either push air in or suck air out the case or pull it out the case. But don't forget to remove that front grille filter if you're pushing air out the front of the case. According to their website, it can mount 8 120mm fans. Now I've tried to count where the fans will go. So you've obviously got one at the back. We've got 2 at the top there. Let me just double check whether it can take 3 on there. Maybe 3. I don't think 3 will fit along the top. So 2 120s at the top, 3 at the front. So we are 2 fans short. Now the only place that I can see where a fan might be able to mount is on the bottom here. Now I can see there are some screw holes. There are holes and there are also screw holes along the bottom PSU shroud here. And I think that's where a 120mm fan would mount, because there are 2 sets, so I'm pretty confident that that's where they would go. It also looks like you can mount SSDs here as well. I'm pretty certain that you could actually get those screwed in there. If not, that's for some kind of bracket that sits up here. I don't actually know what they are for. It doesn't mention anything on their website about what these screw holes are for, but I suspect that they are actually for mounting SSDs. So yes, actually you can mount 8 if you want to. In this case, you can mount 8 120mm fans, or 2 140mm fans, which I believe will only fit along the top. Now the advantage of having bigger fans is, one, they're quieter and they spin slower, so they push the same amount of air through as a 120, but doing it slower and quieter because of the bigger surface area of the fan blades. So if you're looking for quiet, then that's quite good to have that option, but you can only fit them in the top. You can't fit them in the front. So it states on the website that you can mount 2 5.5-inch drive or 5.25-inch hard drives in there, which you can, and you do that, as we mentioned earlier, with the hard drive mount that goes on the bottom of the front of the case. And it says you can mount 3 SSDs, but I actually think you can mount 4, because you can, at a push, mount an SSD with the 2 screws on the side. Well, they say you can mount 3, so I think I'm right in saying that there, and then 1 on here. Okay, so just to show you briefly what the front fans actually look like with them spinning. I've taken the GPU out because this thing has broken fins on the fans and it vibrates like crazy when I turn it on. So we've taken it out because, well, because you wouldn't be able to hear me. Let's put it like that. So As you can see here, this is not plugged into RGB on the board at all, so we control the color of the fans with the button on the right hand side of the case. And you just basically push that and it will go through the different modes that it has built into the controller, which is actually at the top of the case where the USB ports are and the power button is and all that stuff. So there's very few different modes there, but you know, there's some to choose from if you still happen to have a board that doesn't take or doesn't have the capability to let you control the ARGB fans. To build in, it was actually really good. I didn't have any major complaints with it. Cable management wasn't too bad. It was pretty easy, pretty standard, to be honest with you. There wasn't anything really to be concerned about, other than there isn't a lot of room between this panel here and actually where the side panel goes on. The side panel is flimsy, so if you're trying to hide a lot of cables, and especially down this way here, you could probably move some of these over here where it's a bit more recessed in, and there's probably about, I don't know, it's probably about 5 centimeters or so of space there. So you could potentially do that behind where the SSDs would sit if you're putting SSDs in there. But if you're going to do it on this bit, as I did here, it's going to be a bit tricky. So I wouldn't suggest doing it this way because it makes the side panel a bit difficult to put on. So you'd have to lie it on its side, kind of push it on, which isn't ideal because over time it would end up bulging the side panel out, which is not a great look, to be honest with you, for your new gaming rig. So I would suggest routing the cables down here, tying them using these cutouts here where you can mount cable tie through or Velcro strip if that's what you're going to use, and it would probably have a much better finish to it and you wouldn't get that problem pushing the side panel on. That's the only thing I would suggest, but other than that, it's great. Oh, and of course the lack of space with the drive cage in its default position, really want to move that over or take it out if you're not using a larger mechanical drive. If you don't need it, take it out. You'll have all that space to hide the cables. Just make sure they don't touch the fans on the front because it can happen. Inside the case, there really isn't that much of a problem in like putting the system together. The only thing that I do have a bit of a gripe about is for a full ATX board like this one, it does come with a bag of extra screws and motherboard mounts and things like that. The only issue is that this did not come with the required amount needed to mount a full ATX motherboard. It only came with 2 spare, which isn't enough for the extra 3 screws that you need from what's already in the case. It has all the mounts for a mini ITX, but if you want to put a full ATX one in there, you need a spare mount for the motherboard itself, because for me, I had one missing. Now that may not be the case for everyone. I could have just been unlucky in this instance, but it's something to be aware of, and I will reach out to them and just see if they are aware of that problem, because it could catch people short and literally could short your motherboard out if you happen to put them in the wrong place. I don't have one in the bottom because for the most part, the bit where you're going to be putting the most force when you're building your system is where the power cables go in to power the system. That's the hardest part. So I've actually got a screw on the top 2 end screw holes there because that's where it needs the most support. And I haven't done it for the bottom because, well, you don't need to push so hard on that when you're plugging cables in when you build your system. So it's just something to be wary of, and it's something that I think is a bit of a concern actually, and that really does need addressing. Going back to the power supply, this is another bit of an oversight maybe, and I don't know whether this was an intentional, whether they just didn't consider that people would want to switch the power supply around. You can only mount the power supply with the fan facing down, which is fine because there is a filter on the bottom, so it sucks air in from the bottom and there is a filter there, so that is good, that's fine. But if you want to mount the power supply with the fan facing up, so you've got the fan up here inside the case, you can't, because actually the screws do not line up, and you just can't do it. It's just not designed that way. So it would be nice to have the option to be able to switch the power supply around if you want to, because they're not all the same, and sometimes it could be on this side, who knows, it could be totally different, and then someone's got an issue where they want to have the fan up or down and they can't. So I think that needs to be looked at. So we haven't already mentioned this, but the case dimensions are 350mm by 195 by 134 millimeters in size. I'll put that up on the screen so you can kind of visually see which measurement is for what axis on this case. It is quite a narrow case compared to some that I've got or I've seen. So that's actually quite nice. It's quite narrow in its design, but as you can see, and as I mentioned at the beginning, it is inside nothing like the Fractal Torrent, and it doesn't claim to be fair, but it does kind of just copy the front. So I don't know. I mean, I do like that design. It's really good airflow. I can feel a lot of air coming through there. Obviously there'd be a lot more air without the filter on there, so it will restrict it somewhat, but you don't really want dust getting in your system, so it's always good to have a filter on the intake fans. Speaking of the fans, they are chained together, so one kind of plugs into the other, into the other, into the other. This is the mess of cable going on that we've got here, and it plugs into a SATA connection, which is actually really nice to see, so I'm quite pleased to see that. It's a bit of there's a bit of weirdness going on with this. I don't know whether it's just me or whether they forgot a cable or what's going on here, but if I can just undo the strap there, I'll try and show you. So all the cables kind of just chain together, as I just said, and I think there's a splitter there as well, which makes them all work, and that's fine. The only thing I can't seem to figure out for the life of me is how it actually plugs into your motherboard for RGB. Now we've got fan header there, so that will plug into the board somewhere, but do you notice the problem? It's the wrong way around. There's no cable to actually plug into the board, so you can't even control the fans with the motherboard, so they are constantly set at whatever the default speed is, and you can't change them because there's no way to change it on the front panel I/O either. So I don't know if there's just a cable missing or if I'm not seeing something here. I don't know, but I can't actually plug these into the motherboard. So yeah, I would actually need to go and purchase a male to female connection to allow me to control the fans on the motherboard if that's what I want to do. Otherwise they stay at their default, whatever speed they're going at. I don't know. I assume it's maximum most of the time. When you're not plugging something in, it will just run at maximum. Yeah, so I don't quite know. There's no other cables coming off apart from the RGB, which is very similar to this one. It's the wrong way around. The cable, either that or I'm missing a cable or something wasn't sent to me with this case. That's a male connection. Again, it needs to be the other way around. It needs to be male to female. So I can't even plug that into the motherboard to control the ARGB, which is 3-pin ARGB, by the way. I didn't mention that earlier, but it is 3-pin. But I can't use it. There's no way to plug it in. They don't give you any extension cables to convert it. Like I say, whether that's missing in my particular case, I don't know, but I will reach out to them and just let them know that, guys, you need to supply cables so people can actually use this stuff. Overall, it's actually not a bad case. It's pretty good to build in. It took me, what, less than an hour to build this system, although it's a non-functioning system. Everything is plugged in where it should be, apart from the graphics card, which makes it a non-functioning system. But other than that, the system would actually work just fine. It has 3 fans on the front ready to go, although we can't control them. Everything was plugged in on the top. That was pretty easy to do, pretty motherboard dependent actually. So nothing was really out of place or odd apart from the things that I've already mentioned, which to be honest with you isn't that much. So for the price, which is £38.99p, which is actually a little bit of a discount because it's usually $42.99. Now you can get this on Amazon, but if you want the free gifts that are available, like the fan that I mentioned earlier, and there's a couple of other things, I think you can even get one of these 3.5-inch displays, which might actually fit just there quite nicely. It would look quite a decent system actually for not a lot of money. The only thing we haven't mentioned, of course, is who makes the case. Well, if you haven't clicked on the link in the video description already, then it's Hellcracks. Now, don't ask me where the name came from. I did ask them and I got a kind of weird reason why it was called Hellcracks, but I prefer to use the name HCS, which is probably why they have HCS at the bottom on the front panel there. Hellcracks is a bit weird if I'm honest with you, but that's the name they're going with, and this is what they've got, and it's a cheap, pretty modern looking case, and there you go. Good airflow. It's got good airflow on it, just need to fix the other bits I've mentioned. Anyway, if you like this kind of content, then don't forget to like this video and share it out to everyone that you think might be interested in a cheap budget case with 3 ARGB fans that kind of looks like a torrent. For us, this case will be getting used. It will be stripped down and then rebuilt into someone else's system, and they'll be using it for the foreseeable future. I think it would look good with a bit of a spray job, so stay tuned, because we are actually planning to do a different spray job or different color on this It'll be quite nice to see how that turns out. So get subscribed so you don't miss that when it comes out. Anyway, that will do it for me, and we'll catch you in the next video.